2013. Jim, I'd like to welcome you to the World History Project of the Denver Police Museum. Would you please state your full name?
James C. Charles Powers.
And what was your badge number, Jim?
My badge number is 4636.
When did you join the police department?
Well, it would be October the 1st, 1946.
Why did you choose a career in being in law enforcement?
Well, I would say that it was we were encased in a family love for the police department. My father and my two brothers were ahead of me. I was just coming back from the Marines and teaching and so forth, and I would say basically it was the economy at the time. That was in 1946. Things were bad. I made inquiry. I taught school in California, in Salt Lake City, but my mama and wanted to come back to assist her mother through the things that they had to go through after her father died. So we left California, and with some regret for me because all the years that I spent there going to school. And all my friends were there. And coming back from California, I made application with the Denver Public Schools. I was trying real hard to find a job. And finally, it was strange. My father, we were up fishing up Basalt, the family was, and he pulls a paper apart saying that, good heavens, look at this, they're having the police exam tomorrow. And I didn't, well, he said, did you make an application? I said, no, I didn't, Dad. He said, well, I did for you. He said, I figured you wouldn't. Well, then my brother Bill, who was up there with us, said, what day is tomorrow? And the thought was, well, it's Saturday, it's such and such, and gosh, I got court. They really bombed me, I'll tell you that. And so it all ended up with me going on the police department. And basically, they had made a notice to me that I had been selected to start October the 1st. Be prepared, report, do all those type of things you have to do. And about 2 weeks before I accepted, 2 weeks before, I got a letter from the Denver Public Schools indicating that they had a place. So, but it wasn't totally that. And the salary for a police department was better than the salary for the teaching.
Well, what's your starting salary?
At that time, the starting salary for the school was $2,000 a year.
How
and
about
the police department was paying $2,800 a year.
Remember what that figured out a month?
No, I don't, but it wasn't too much because I'll tell you what, it seemed to me, Paul Merrily and I used to argue about it. I told him we got $67 a month, and always it was $87. Then after a year on the job, they gave us a $100 raise, and it worked out real well. In the final analysis, I was very happy that I chose the police department because of the retirement.
Where was the police academy located? You did go through an academy.
We certainly did. It was the public swimming place on 20th and Bathhouse, we used to always call it.
20th and Curtis.
20th and Curtis, yeah. And I'm trying to think of the captain that was in charge of it, but we went there. But when I went on the job, the first day was in the uniform was to be in the chief's office, to be acquainted with the chief. And then his thought was that yes, we had to go to school. We went over to the bathhouse, and we had one day of Red Cross work, one day of identifying our purpose in life. We were there to help the people and do this and do that. And finally, we came to the point we actually had 2 days training. And then we were put on, assigned to the different stations, and the man that we were with became what I always called him, our senior officer trainer. And I had some good ones.
So they acted more or less like the training officers today? Or?
Well, I would say so. Like more like I'm trying to think of the name that they gave to them today, indicating they became technicians or so forth, and but they also worked the street.
What was your first assignment after you got out of the academy?
I was assigned to walk in the beat at Larmer Street. That was from say 15th to 23rd, or 15th, yeah, to about 19th.
How did you communicate with the department at that time, headquarters?
Well, we had the call boxes on the corner, and that's what we had at that time. Whenever we needed the police department, we either went into a store with a telephone, or we had to walk down to the corner for the police system.
Did the cars have radios in them at that
No.
time? So the only communication you had was with...
Well, wait a minute, I should back that up. I'm thinking of my father's. He went on the job in 1920. But anyway, no, we could call, but there was some difficulty that I can't remember at this time with our ability to communicate properly.
What assignment did you like the most, Jim?
Walking the beat.
Walking the beat. Did you ever get a car assigned to you, a district?
Oh yes, I stayed downtown for quite a long time, and I had my car assigned when I finally went all through the Mirage. It was car 14. That was in the Lower Larmer, and up around the 10th and Curtis, and up on to the housing project. I was assigned first with Wigington, Lee Wigington. What a policeman.
This is off the subject a little bit, but did they go into like Casey's Reno Inn and the policemen drank back then in those days?
Oh, sure they did. In fact, I would say that when I first went on the job, there was another officer with me, and we were just talking, what do you think, Jim? How do you like it? We came on the job together again. I said, you know, from what I've seen, I think I made a big mistake. And then there was quite a few of them that were drinking and taking time off and so forth. And that took me, I was disillusioned about a lot. But it was Chief Forsyth? What was the chief at that time? All the people who were on the brink were retired. And from that time on, it was cleaned up and everything was fine.
They do a lot of mooching back in those days too, like cigarettes and meals.
Yes, they did. That was part of their. You know, they felt obligated to do that. It was part of their wages. You know, they would go in, and I don't know about mooching. It just seemed that it wasn't an act that was established long before I was ever on the job. But if you were in uniform, it was automatic.
Did you ever meet any famous people back in those?
Oh gosh, when I was in the traffic bureau, I was fortunate enough to work with a lot of the Secret Service in their efforts to provide protection for the presidents when they came into the airport. And I enjoyed that so very much because I met a lot of presidents and shook a lot of their hands. And they always treated me as an equal, and I had a great deal of respect for the whole program.
What were some of the presidents you met?
Well, it was Nixon, and you got to help me now. My memory on names is bad. Nixon,
Eisenhower, Kennedy.
Eisenhower. In fact, Eisenhower, I was able at one time when we were out at the airport to giving him security and bolstering the whole issue, and it started raining something terrible, and we were standing by the limousine, his limousine. So he said, let's get in the car. Let's don't get wet. So Mamie was with him. And naturally, that was not my job to sit inside. So he was appreciative, and I was too.
Right.
How about Johnson and Truman?
They were all there. quickly, I've been trying to remember the one president that came from the South that was,
Jimmy Carter,
no, there was
Lyndon Johnson.
Well, we handled Johnson, but we handled everything that came in from Washington, D.C.
That's right.
Did you ever get involved with any of the officers that were killed in the line of duty?
No.
What were some of the crime scenes that you remember, good or bad?
Well, frankly, I was when I went into the on the police department. At some point in time, I became the sergeant's driver, and we saw a lot of it, but we never got into the what happened at the beginning. It was always the aftermath that he was responsible for, and so forth. So we never did get into the nitty-gritty.
Did you have any strange calls?
No.
When did you retire, Jim?
I retired October the 1st, 1971.
What do you think about this, having a law enforcement museum in Denver?
Do what?
What do you think about having a law enforcement museum in Denver?
Well, I think that the ones that will benefit most are the police officers and their families, but at the same time, anyone who, if you can make it there and available and have parking facilities and so forth, I would say a lot of policemen on retirement and all this and stuff, or on vacation, could make it a point to come to the museum.
How did you and Sophie meet?
Sophie and I, my two brothers, married two sisters. And at the time, she at that time was approximately 10 years old, came up from Walsenburg, and they had family, friends. But she played the accordion. And so it became a chore for her, which she loved very much, was to play her accordion at their wedding. And she could really play that accordion, I'll tell you that, and everybody loved her. She had her own band as she grew older. When she got to be in high school and so forth, she was a accordion player on one of the local polka bands. So I met her. I don't know whether I fell in love with the accordion or fell in love with her, but we got married. We were married close to 68 years, and she was a great girl. And if I have done anything, I would say I had a good woman.
And when did you get married?
We got married January the 2nd, 1943.
How many children?
January the 2nd, 1943.
How many children did you have?
5.
5. Did any of those go into law enforcement?
My son Pat, he is with us today, and he retired a couple of years back now, and once again, we never had problems on our family with all of them on the police department. In fact, it was very difficult for me when my father died, because he was our fishing partner. When he passed away, my two older brothers, they lost interest in doing things family-wise. We all went fishing, but no, it was quite a problem.
What was your brothers' names that were on the department?
Well, my oldest brother, Thomas Edward, and William J. is the second. And they both, Tom put 32 years in on the job. I think my brother Bill took around 26 years. And Tom retired as a detective in the auto theft. And Bill retired as a patrolman. My father retired, and he was in the juvenile section. He also had 32 years of service.
Did your father ever tell you about any of the experiences he had on the department?
Yeah, but I can't repeat them.
Can't you?
I don't think it'd be for my good or anyone else's good.
What did he do? Walk a beat or ride a horse?
My father walked what we call the Five Points area for a good number of years. I would say around 10. I'm not familiar with it. He went on the job in 1920, and he worked there, and then he was transferred to Larmer Street. When he left Larmer Street, he's the only policeman that I know of that the business owners in Five Points bought him a beautiful pistol, which he carried for the rest of his workday life in uniform. And I always point to that as to the fact that you don't get that for doing nothing for the people. They were really called him. When I went on the job, I learned that they didn't call him officer, they called him Mr. Powers. So that is a calling of respect, they regular, so forth and so on. And then he went to Larmer Street and worked the beat there, and then from there on he went up to the Juvenile Bureau and worked that out. Yeah, and then while we're here, I'd like to have you introduce to you my son Patrick Powers, who was the last of the Powers family on the police department.
What was your dad like as a father, being a policeman?
Well, as a young man or a young boy, my father worked a lot. My mother raised us, but I knew my dad was to the right. I knew he was there in a shadow. I remember him working at Illich's, directing traffic. When he wasn't working on the job, he'd be up at Illich's at night directing traffic as a lieutenant. And we never had to want, but we had to work for it. I mean, we had our chores as kids to do the work around the house, the yard, but my dad took care of us. And he was there with the problem we needed. He was a great father. And lived right next door to his father, my grandpa. And it was a great upbringing for me, because what I had available to me for free, history with my family going back as far as it did. My grandmother, his mother, from Belgium, what she went through to get here. She was at the island on the East Coast to get here as a migrant. I mean, and my grandfather, what he did is on the job and what he went through, and they called him Big Mike when he walked the beat. That was his nickname down there in Five Points. My dad brought up the weapon they gave him when he retired from the beat. I've got it. I look at it once a week. But as a father, I could never expect to say more than I should, because my father and I, as a kid, had disagreements. To this date, I said that, Dad, you should get the diploma for the high school because you were there more than I was. I went to St. Catherine's. I was brought up in a very, very Catholic family. The principal of St. Catherine's was my aunt. Monsignor Powers was Monsignor St. James, named after him. And I don't know if I was different from my brothers and sisters, but I always had a tendency to get in trouble in school. I guess I didn't like anybody saying something about my dad, me personally, because it was like a ring of a bell. I'd be in a fight, I'd be kicked out of school. And then, back then, it's not like it was today. I mean, you go home, you have your mother, your father call me. That day. And I hated it to go home and tell my dad again that I was kicked out of school. I think I was 3 or 4 times in St. Catherine's, three times in the Holy Family. And I just could not, I needed a change as a young man. I says, my dad and I, the last time I was kicked out of Holy Family, this is the truth, my dad and I sat in the garage in his car. disgust about my future. And to this date, I told him, I said, I want to quit school and I want to join the service. And my dad, we went in the house. He said, I think we better have dinner first and talk it over with your mother. We had dinner and we were brought up on West 40th Avenue, right across Skinner Junior High, North Denver Punk. And I'm standing out the window with Dad, and he says, Pat, you know, I don't think it's a wise idea right now to quit high school. I wasn't good from pen to paper. But if you showed me something to do, you'd never have to show me again. It was like common sense and the ability to do the work that I was taught the first time. But to give me a book, to read it, to put it on paper, which my dad did, retiring as a captain. He excelled at every test he had. He was #1 on every list. They even made a position for him in the property bureau as a sergeant. First sergeant of the Denver Police Department to be in the property bureau downtown at 14th and Chapman. Because they needed a place for him, because he was an intelligent man. He knew how to read, write, and work with people. I didn't know how to do that. I tried the best I could. But the memories of my uncles and cousins, Doors, they were on the job. I mean, it was like leaving one family on West 40th at 21 years old, coming home from Vietnam, taking the test, coming on the job at 25. It was like going from one family to another, the Denver Police Department. Everybody knew me through Dad. But a lot of people knew me because they were friends and I used to fish with them as a young kid. And really I was brought up by his friends. They were always hanging around Grandpa, my grandfather. Always over at the house, dinner, playing bingo, playing cards, and I knew them all. I could. One time, I was 12 years old. My Uncle Willie came to our house in the patrol car. At that time, there was no portable radios. And I was playing in the backyard. I was swinging on the swing. Willie waved me over. And he says, sit in the car. I'm going to leave the ignition on. But if you hear car 12, you come in the house and get me. I was 12 years old. So I sat in the car, and I said, please don't get a call. You know, I'm sitting there listening. They say car 10, car 14, you know, car 21. I said, come on, Uncle Willie, get out of that house. And they were planning a fishing trip, so he had to go over there and drop something off to Dad. About 5 minutes later, he came out, and I was soaking sweat. I was sitting in that car, and I said, I'm glad you came back out, because I wouldn't know what to do if they said, called your car. I said, I probably would have tripped and broke my neck getting out of this car. But I remember a lot of things. I never did see my grandfather in uniform. Excuse me. But he was my best friend, my grandfather. And I know Dad, every time I think of him. But
Every time Pat got into trouble with me, we would take the necessary corrections. But after it was over, he'd be over to his grandpa, and his grandpa, I could see through the window, was petting him on the back of the head.
he was a
He was a lovable man.
he was a man's man.
Did you ever ride in a police car with your dad or your grandpa?
Before I came on the job, see, when I got out of the service in '66, I wanted to be a policeman, but I wanted to see what else was out there. But I got married before I even got a job. My father, his neighbor, good friend, Carl Brueggemann, lived right over here across the street, was an engineer at the porcelain plant at Coors. Man, I needed a job. Carl said, my dad told me I was married on Saturday. My dad got the word from Carl, have Pat be at the porcelain plant Monday morning. So my honeymoon was a day and a half. So Monday morning with my lunchbox, I showed up at 7 o'clock in the morning at the porcelain plant up at Coors. Went through the interview, took the test, and I was hired. I went from really back-breaking work to becoming a Class 3 fireman at the porcelain plant. So when I left the porcelain plant, I was a Class 3 fireman. I took care of all the kilns and everything they did to bake porcelain. One day, my father sat me down, and he says, "What is your future?" I said, "Man, I'm making good money, a lot of overtime. I can support my wife, 2 kids. My wife didn't have to work. I had twin girls right away within a year." And I said, "Dad, I'm doing okay at Coors." He said, "When do you want to retire?" I said, "I'm 25 years old. I said, "I'd like to retire at a decent age, Dad." He said, "Would you like to retire at 50 or 55? But as a young man, I didn't think that far ahead. I was always 10 years ahead of my actual age, but not 30. So I went home and thought about it, because he called me and he said, "They're giving a test, and you should go down and give it." Excuse me. And I forget, I had his name on the back of my tongue, the man that headed up the civil service there in 1970. But he called me, he says, "Pat, the test..."
Anderson, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't Anderson. His son was on the job, and I'll get the name here in a minute. But he called me up and he says, "Pat, we didn't get the notice out to you soon enough. The test was yesterday, but will you come in Saturday morning to take the written exam?" I was the only one there. I said, "Sure, I'll be down there." At that time, I think it took 3.5 hours to take a written exam, because it came in part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4. And like I say, I was never a pen to paper man, and I think I wrote a 75. I told my dad, I says, "I'm going on the police department," and which I did.
Jim, is there anything else that, this is your interview, is there anything you'd like to discuss or bring out?
Well, I'd just like to remind, there was a point that Pat was making there, that my actions and so forth, I pulled the same thing on him as my father pulled on me, in getting him on notice as to taking the test. But he's always been a leader on the job. He was worked traffic for a good number, well, it was almost his entire police time. He worked the districts too, but Pat had a liking for traffic work and did a fine job for it. Other than that, I don't know. I think that we have covered things properly. I can remember this. I can remember today. I never regretted a day of going to work. It was always a joy for me. To me, going to work was not difficult. And I never had a problem on the job in terms of making things rough, but I always worked with a great bunch of people, and I attribute a lot of the times to their help and so forth that they gave to me as a thing that helped me very much on the job.
Well, I want to thank you for taking part in the project.
Would you recommend law enforcement to young people today?
Well, naturally, somewhere along the line, we got to find the one that wants to be a policeman for the proper reasons. To me, it looks to me like our graduates today have a difficult time of crossing a lot of streams in the way when they should have been over those streams long earlier in their life. But the department is getting people now at age, I think, is 20, what, 21? They dropped the age of the police officer. But when I went on the job, you had to be 25 years of age. I think that somewhere along in those years, they lost a lot of maturity, a loss of common sense, which somehow or other, even in my time going on the job, if you don't have common sense, you shouldn't be a police officer. And I question sometimes when you read about what the cops, what they do on the street and so forth. Those old timers that trained me got me through those problems. But I think they got to give a lot of attention to attitude coming on. But they think it's a joyride, you know, like we see on TV all the time. And it's not, doesn't. Some have difficulty. Thank God not all of them do.
I was going to ask you, is there any particular, while you were on the force, any officers that you remember fondly or that really made a big difference to you?
Well, to me, there was Paul Merrily, retired captain, and he and I went on the job together. I was number one, he was number two. So we were kind of had a close through our lives, going through our rank. When we each had a time to be have the ability to select a junior officer, well, we did select one another, but it was good and it was fine. There were a lot of people that gave me encouragement because they had such a proud attitude about the job they were doing, and many of them did. Now, I have talked to a lot of people. A lot of them are still on the job. They're not retired, but they don't. I don't get that breath of enthusiasm in what they were doing. They're a hangdog expression when before it was you betcha, and that's gone. Of course, I haven't made it a habit of meeting with the police officers. I feel I'm here at my home. I haven't been downtown since I retired, so I don't get an opportunity to see too many of them. And the ones that I have are gradually disappearing. And yeah, exactly. Like Zeitz, he and I, we all went on the job together. But I don't know where I was. I don't know what I was doing. But I didn't know that he had died. So there you are. See.
I was going to ask you, after you retired, what did you do?
Well, after I retired, I went to the Federal Center, and I was there for 15 years, and I was the chief operations officer for it was like a new approach to their security. They were trying to put their people in uniforms that could be identifiable as police officers in the federal buildings, such as the courts, the federal building here in Denver, the building in Ogden, Utah, and so forth. They wanted their own police officers. So we were going through training on, we had the same format as the Denver police did. And we actually, it was easy for me because I thought I had a great deal of respect for the Denver police officers, so we emulated the things that the police department do. We installed a radio that was communicative. We bought cars for officers to work in to patrol. We gave them assignments like in the federal office building. Their purpose was to provide security for the peoples therein, but on the sidewalks not. And we responded to the Indian problems like Wounded Knee. And when I first went on the job, we sent a task force up to Fargo, I think, Idaho, and we supplemented the local officers by relieving them of inside the federal building, and they took the outside. And we got through that little nose-to-nose attitude up there, and with no problems at all. And we had the same thing down at Santa Fe, New Mexico.
New Mexico,
Yeah. And they too, we went down into a federal building. At that time, they were, as you recall, they were putting bulletproof glass around the judges and this and that, and in all these places. But I was in charge of the Region 8, which was approximately 8 states.
Very good. So on behalf of the museum, we want to thank you for your service to the citizens of Denver.
Well, thank you.